Welcome. This is Jennifer Grenke and Michelle Polzin, and we are from the Wisconsin PBIS network. We're both technical assistance coordinators. I cover the North region and Michelle covers the East region. What we wanted to address today is some of those behaviors that occur in your classroom, and then how you can assess where you are at and what are some of the triggers that those behaviors cause and how we can avoid that. So it's just kind of like when you go to the doctor. If you have a migraine, the first thing they have you do is to fill out an assessment or a survey of when and what are the triggers that cause this headache, and to determine what are those causes and what we can do to avoid those triggers. So how often have you heard some of these statements? How many times do I have to tell you to work quietly? Didn't I just tell you to get your work done? Why are you talking when I'm talking? It's April. Do I really have to reteach this again? Although these are meant to deter misbehavior, these types of statements often reinforce misbehavior. So these are some of the elements that are used to gauge your discipline referral process and procedures. So here we have: the school has clear definitions for behaviors that interfere with academic and social success, and a clear policy and procedure for addressing office-managed versus staff-managed behaviors. And then when we look at this gold standard, what we want is for you to have the definitions and procedures for managing problems that are clearly defined, documented, trained, and also shared with families. So what we're talking about today is, have you trained your staff? Do they understand how to document and manage those problem behaviors in your classrooms? And then when we get to the policies, do they understand what the policies are? Those school policies that the procedures are they described? Are they proactive? Are they instructive? Are they restorative? Because we want something that is going to maintain a student's dignity as well as help that student to develop a skill. And again, there's the gold standard here. So the documentation includes and emphasizes those proactive approaches, and the administrator reports consistent use. So can you tell that all of your staff are able to efficiently and effectively follow those procedures and policies that your school has in place? So when you're teaching your staff, we want that discipline referral process to be predictable and consistent, as well as knowing what the continuum of responses are. So like preventing and reteaching behavior, making sure that the responses that we have fit the situation. We don't want them to be too harsh, but we also don't want to be too lenient. What we really want is to help that child develop a skill. And also we want to discourage repeating problem behaviors. We don't want to maintain inappropriate behaviors like a child that acts out in math because they struggle with math. It's easier to sit in the office than to be in class and work on those skills needed, so they might continue to act up so that they can be sent to the office. So what we want is to keep that child in the class, in the seat, learning. So we need to be able to develop some processes and procedures for that. And is the discipline process, referral process, defined, taught, and agreed upon with all of your staff? And remember that completing those minor discipline forms or the major office discipline referral, those are not punishments. Those are just a way to document some behaviors. So here's a classroom matrix with some procedures and routines for the different learning environments that are in your building. Think of this as a poster that's in the classroom. So let's focus on this block right here. This: listen to others, accept differences, use kind words, encourage others, and wait your turn to speak. So let's just focus on the use kind words. If the teacher has taught the students about being respectful during cooperative learning, then she can reteach or redirect a student that uses an unkind remark, trying to do this with minimal interruption of the teaching and reminding the student of the expectations of the classroom. So what we want to encourage you to do is we have a classroom management module that's on our website that we'll get to a little bit more information later, but they go into some specifics on how you can teach students and with minimal interruptions during your teaching. So something that we do is we document minors to determine those patterns of behavior. We record those repeated minor behaviors to look for patterns, because those patterns are what help us determine what is the trigger for that student and when is it occurring. So I'm just going to kind of go with that example I gave before. So we'll think about, why is this student using unkind words with someone else? What can we do to help them? So that's being proactive. We're trying to prevent it. Why are they doing it? Maybe it's the seating. Maybe we need to move one child in a different place. And then if we look at those replacement behaviors, so maybe we need to help a child fix it, or to learn an appropriate phrase using kind words to help them get over that the negative remarks that they're making. So we help them develop those replacement behaviors. And then also when that child uses those kind words, we want to encourage them to continue to use those. So that's that reinforcement and encouraging the positive behavior that we're looking for. So here's an example of a repeated behavior that's occurring, that this is a way for a school to develop a plan. So maybe the first time, let's say the teacher pre-teaches the expectations prior to beginning the lesson with the child that uses unkind words. So they're going to talk about them and say, you know, remember, we want to use kind words. And she can do this with the whole class or with the one child, but focusing on, we want to use kind words. The teacher quickly uses that cool tool to redirect or reteach the expectations during that cooperative learning group. So what I'm just talking about is, if she's going to start a lesson with cooperative learning, she might go through what these expectations are, and then really honing in on those using kind words. And the second time, if the child repeats and uses those unkind words, we repeat the first step, but now adding on a quick tally mark. So we want to be able to document how often this is happening. And in a few slides, Michelle is going to show you how you can kind of keep track of those. And it's a way to document a minor in the classroom and then work with the student on a fix-it plan. So what we want is to be able to reteach, document the minor, and then perhaps do that fix-it plan. And then if the behavior occurs the third time, again, you repeat those first two steps. Plus, we're going to add on that fix-it plan, but this time we might do a parent call, because this is something that we're seeing occur over and over, and that the parents might need to be working with the child at home as well. We can't be calling home for everything, but when we see a pattern, we do want to notify the parents of what's happening and what our process is at school to correct that. And then the fourth time, again, we repeat these three steps that have occurred, but then we're going to look at preventing some strategies based on the function of the behavior, and that is where that documentation of all of those minors come in to be able to determine the correct function of a student's behavior. And the staff is going to determine the data rule for when minors become office managed. So some schools have 3 minors become a major, and that's really up to each individual school how you approach it. I personally don't think that if a student forgets a pencil, that 3 times they forget a pencil, it should go to the office. Most principals don't want to see students for that reason, but it really is left up to the school to make that decision. I just wanted to point out that some of those prevention strategies that you may use are, again, those prompts, those signals, those pre-corrects prior to starting a lesson, and also helping that child develop those replacement behaviors. So sometimes there may be some rehearsals that you need to do, or prompts, and you may need to help that child practice those new teaching or those new behaviors, those replacement behaviors, so the student becomes fluent with using them. Because it's a different skill that they're using, and it takes time to develop those skills. And I'm going to turn this over to Michelle now.
Thanks, Jen. Okay. Oh, shoot. How did that happen? Okay. So we're going to talk about tracking behaviors now. And the tracking minors is useful, but use some caution when you design your procedure. Teachers really need to focus on their teaching and the learning of students. And so what we want to make sure is that students are engaging in the behaviors that will facilitate that learning. And so, as with all elements of the PBIS consequence system, tracking minors is in the background. It's necessary as a structure to support learning. And so here's a way that you can accomplish this. Make sure you keep that system easy and efficient to use. Let's look at each of these guidelines. Starting with this first one. So we're going to keep the system easy and efficient to use. And then we'll determine what criteria is used to determine when a problem behavior is documented. And then you might have questions about, like, does the student need a copy of the minor referral? And at what point might we need to notify family members? So keeping that system easy and efficient to use involves like figuring out what data you want to record. Keep the procedure for recording that data as consistent as you can between classroom teachers so that you're comparing apples to apples and define those behaviors. So you really want to make sure that you have student name, sex, ethnicity, behavior, the time it occurred, and any consequences given. Location may not be necessary since it's usually happening right there in the classroom. And then how you record that data, there are a lot of methods. And you could have a smaller form that is designated just for minors. Another method is to have some kind of Excel spreadsheet, which I'll show you an example of in just a bit. Other teachers have done things like use a Post-it note with tally marks or rubber bands on their wrist or a roll of masking tape where they just tear off a piece with the student's initials and maybe that behavior code and stick it on the side of their filing cabinet, for example, to help them remember that they need to track it on that Excel spreadsheet. And then you need to make sure you know how you're going to analyze your data for the classroom and then how that would be applied to school-wide. If a minor form is used, a procedure needs to be developed for entering that data on the spreadsheet, and then it can be analyzed from there. If the major office discipline referral form is used, there needs to be a way to distinguish majors from minors. And the Excel spreadsheet can help you create those graphs at the classroom level. However, you want a method for aggregating data school-wide so that the school-wide leadership team for PBIS can determine what professional development or cool tools or other routines or procedures that need to be developed. All right. And then let's talk about what criteria needs to be used to determine when a problem behavior should be documented. Here's some general guidelines. These following situations probably would not require documentation. If redirection is all that is needed to address the behavior, or if it requires only a minimum break in your lesson delivery, or if the student needs to be taught the routine. If something just results in minimum disruption to the student's learning of his classroom, and then you may see that the student just needs more practice with the routine. And we already talked about that. Now, if there are misbehaviors that you want to document occur, these might be some situations. You have to stop for more than just a minimum break in your lesson. Or that behavior that you're seeing is disrupting the learning of the student or others more than just to a minimal degree. And also if consequences need to be delivered in some way where you would have to pull a student aside and have a conversation, or perhaps have them go to a spot in the back of the room or something like that to develop their fix-it plan. Here's that example of the tracking minors form. So you can see that they have the different times of the day where there may be different routines or procedures happening in the classroom. There may be the entry procedure and then silent reading, followed by some kind of group activity, and so on. And then the behaviors listed here are the ones that have been determined to occur most frequently in the classroom, and so they have been given a code. And then 6 being other, which I say use with caution. Make sure that you're descriptive. And then the final column here is for the motive or the function of the behavior. And so this is really the important piece. If the behavior occurs repeatedly, that you want to be able to determine the function of the behavior so you know how to proceed with how to work with the student. And then there's that last column where you can indicate the consequence that was delivered. And that is a good way to have conversations with parents. It's a good way to determine if that consequence was effective in discouraging the behavior, and so on. Here's another example for you of a minor tracking form. This one has, all the information that we talked about before. The minor infractions listed here, and then the actions that are possible to be taken from the classroom teacher. So that delivery of a consequence is up to the teacher, and they can use that based upon kind of matching the consequence to what the minor infraction was. So for example, if a student was off task and wasting time, perhaps that might be an opportunity to say, well, I'm going to deliver a mild use of giving their time back through having some time given at lunch, maybe not the full lunch, but part of the lunch, for example. So discipline works when we have this balance between reinforcement and correction. And right now we do have a 20 corrections to every 1 positive. And we really want that to be skewed the other way, where we have 5 positives to every 1 correction, because prevention creates more positive than negative consequences, and your outcomes will be better for your students. When teachers tell me they are having a lot of behaviors, my first question that I ask them is, how are you using your classroom acknowledgement system, and how does that tie into the school-wide? And many times I will find that they have backed off on acknowledgement and are very infrequently, if maybe not at all, using their classroom acknowledgement system. So watch for that. So here are some examples of acknowledgement. You could give high fives. You could be greeting kids at the door by name and asking them to get their materials ready. Just general interest in the student about their puppy, making comments about responsibility or just the way I asked, or appreciation to the whole class. So it could be whole class, individual student. It could be specific to the behavior you wanted to see, but it can also be those relationship building positives that are delivered. So make sure that you have a balance of all of those things happening within that system to balance out your consequences. Here are some resources for you to check into. Take note that some of these materials did come from our classroom management modules on the Wisconsin PBIS network website. Also on our YouTube channel, you can find some other modules that are like this one, webinars that you can see. And then also Florida's Positive Behavior Support Project has something called How Can Using a Minor Form Change Behavior, and that's a little presentation as well. So we thank you for your time today. Please feel free to use these materials with your leadership team or your whole staff for conversation, and we hope that you found this useful, and thank you for your time.